The continuing reality of serious human suffering has been particularly pronounced and even amplified in much of society in recent weeks and months. Whether it's serious illness in a global pandemic or the tensions and pain that emerges because of injustice based on ethnicity or race, society feels like it's coming apart at the seams. In that, we ask, what is the church's role? What do we have to look forward to? How do we move forward? How do we bring healing? How do we cultivate peace? How do we move from the suffering that so many are experiencing forward into a peace that is deep and real and abiding? In Romans chapter 8, the Apostle Paul raises and draws attention to the reality of suffering. And he sets that suffering in the light of eternity. And he begins to point out directions for how we live in the meantime. Paul says in Romans chapter 8, the sufferings of the present time are not worthy to be compared to the glory that is about to be revealed to us. He goes on to describe how all of creation is groaning and is experiencing this sense of futility and pain. How there is just this reality of decay that infiltrates all of creation, not just human life, but the non-human creation as well. And so many people have felt that sense of decay and brokenness and struggle and pain, oppression, injustice, all of these things in very pronounced and amplified ways in recent weeks and months. Paul invites us to remember that the present world is not the end of the story, that a day will come when Christ will come, and Christ will make himself visibly present, that he will bring his people into a new expression of glory, that he will raise the dead, that he will do a work of new creation, that the sufferings of the present time will give way to something infinitely more glorious, infinitely more beautiful, and to such a degree that the weightiness that we feel right now will be seen to have been much smaller than we realize in the present. Perhaps then you ask, well, what about now? What do we do in the meantime while we wait for the glory that is to come? The Apostle Paul gives us some hints about that too. We look forward to the future with hope, and he says that in the meantime, we recognize that the Spirit of God dwells within his people and urges them to find and really seek out places where the world is suffering, places of injustice, places of sin, places of darkness, places where powers and even perhaps demonic powers are at work in the world, and to go to those places carrying the presence of the Spirit, to pray and intercede and work to bring signs of new creation into the present. Paul says that the Spirit helps us. The Spirit helps us when we don't know how to pray. The Spirit helps us when we are at a loss, when we feel helpless. And perhaps you've felt that way lately too, that the forces at work in society are so big and so strong that we simply feel helpless. In those instances, the Spirit of God works within his people to pray. It doesn't always come out in the form of words. Perhaps you felt pain and injustice so strongly that all you can do is groan. And Paul says the Spirit prays within us, sometimes with sighs too deep for words, with groanings that are inarticulate, with this deep sympathetic care, compassion for the places where the world is in pain, for the places where the world is suffering, for those who feel the weight. sin and brokenness and human rebellion in more prominent ways than we've even begun to imagine. So what can we do? Number one, we can understand that God is not distant from our suffering. The Spirit is within us. The Spirit is present with us. And the people of God can carry the presence of God into places that need to experience His wholeness and healing. Another key thing for us to do is to acknowledge other people's pain. If you've experienced suffering, you know that not everyone knows how you feel. And sometimes when people come along and say, hey, I know how you feel, you want to say, no, you don't know how I feel. I'm suffering and I'm struggling, and there's no way that you can know how I feel. But perhaps we as the people of God can go to those who are suffering, who are struggling, and say, hey, you know what? I don't know how you feel, but I do care. And I want to hear about your experience, and I want to be present for you. If you need to weep, I want to weep with you. If you need comforting, I want to comfort you. If you need an advocate, I want to be an advocate for you in the grace and the power of the Lord Jesus Christ and in the power of the Spirit. So yes, the Apostle Paul says we wait for a glory that is to come. But he also says we engage now to show the world what it looks like when the people of God bring the presence of God by His Spirit through their bodies to the places where the world is suffering. So the invitation then is to take a look around you. Where are the places where your friends, neighbors, or maybe strangers, perhaps especially strangers, are saying, hey, I'm in pain here. I'm hurting. I need help. And maybe you don't understand their hurt, and maybe you don't understand their pain, and maybe you don't understand why they feel like they need help, but you can take it at face value that they say they do. Maybe the people of God can go to those places and groan alongside those who suffer and say, I may not understand, but I do care. And the Lord Jesus Christ cares. And He has suffered with us, and He has suffered for us. And He offers compassion through His people.